Hello, everyone. Happy Halloween. I'm going to go ahead and launch us off. We're talking today about unmasking joy. My name is Maura, and we're going to focus on the role of educator well-being in student success. So, how important it is for educators to feel well and be well in order to do the very best for their students and really help them achieve in all areas of academics. So, I want to take a moment to introduce my fellow presenters today. I'm joined today by two esteemed educators, Dr. Quintin Shepherd, who's the superintendent in Victoria ISD down in Texas, and then also Dr. Kecia Ray, who is the president of K20 Connect. Um, that is an all-female consulting company in the education space. So I'm super happy to be with both of you today. My name is Maura, and I'm here just to introduce you and kick us off. I know this is going to be a lively discussion. I'm really excited to have both of you here today. So thank you so much for joining us here at Gaggle. We appreciate it. And I look forward to learning more from you. I want to give just a little bit of background for the impetus of this talk and kind of what we're thinking about in the context of education. So much has changed, as we all know, in recent years and over the course, I'm sure, of both of your careers. One of the pieces of data that's quite startling and is this report that's published by the CDC that really looks at wellness for high school students. And in the most recent report, they indicated that 42% of high school students felt persistently sad or hopeless. 29% of them experienced poor mental health. That's nearly a third. 22% of students seriously considered attempting suicide, and 10 unfortunately did attempt suicide. So the picture that educators are facing today in their classrooms is dire. It's a really sad set of circumstances. And what we're seeing in students is a group of students that really need additional support and love and care. This data is also reflected in what we see at Gaggle. When we look back over the past 5 years at the type of incidents that we're reporting on, we're seeing an increase over the 5 years in almost every category. So 87% increase in the number of alerts we're issuing for suicide and self-harm, and then an alarming more than 450% increase in harassment. So we know that students are struggling, that they're suffering, that they're hurting themselves and one another. And it's a sad picture. It's a sad state of affairs. And so what we want to talk about and focus on today is not so much this sad news, because educators are always faced with challenges. They've been faced with challenges since the dawn of time. There's always a new picture. And so knowing that we have this bad news and these numbers that are quite striking, we want to focus on how we look at the perspective and how we find opportunities for joy, for improvement, for fulfillment. We want teachers to feel happy and satisfied in their work because it's such important work that they're doing. So because it's Halloween, we're going to think about this as the tricks and the treats. So I've given you some of the tricks in the form of these alarming statistics, and I'm going to turn things over to Dr. Ray. She's going to talk a little bit more about some of the tricks, and then Dr. Shepherd will have the pleasure and the privilege of giving us some treats as well. So I turn it over to you, Dr. Ray. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Maura. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here. And I love my partnership with Gaggle, so I'm really glad to be able to speak about some of the things that I learn in working with you guys as well. So, you mentioned that CDC data, and I know Dr. Shepherd has seen this in probably not just the most recent years, but in the history of your superintendency. The kids that are just coming in sad, hopeless situations, and especially that suicide rate and the number that really caught my eye was harassment. And that report that I've read and new reports that have even come out are talking more and more about it being related to race and gender issues, all things that we try to cover in schools, we try to talk about, we try to teach kids, but there's just so much kind of left unsaid and undone that you can't reach everything, you can't discuss everything, you can't imagine everything that is going to go through a kid's head. And I think, one of the tricks is the teachers having this unbelievable number of kids in their care, who they're not only responsible for academic progress and academic achievement, but also their emotional support and kind of helping with their overall happiness and their overall how they feel about school, or how they feel about family, or how they feel about being accepted as, especially like a teen or even a middle school or a tween, where they're kind of coming into their own and not really sure of themselves. And yeah, I just think that is one of the biggest tricks we have in our space right now. And I think it's wearing on our teachers because they are leaving in droves. I mean, that's a huge challenge that our school districts have, is maintaining their highly qualified teachers and enticing them in to the field. We've got some sad issues going on there. Boo, Kecia has to talk about all the bad stuff. Another trick that I think we've got in our midst today is just the pivot point that COVID had. A lot of times in teaching and learning, we say that everything is cyclical. I've been teaching in education since 1986. That's right. I'm only 27. And things have come around. I mean, they happened. Everybody was like, oh, let's do this. And then, no, don't do that. That's terrible. Nobody should do that. And then, oh, let's do this. And you're like, didn't we do this 10 years ago? Nobody remembers it. So we'll just do it again. So everything's cyclical. But COVID kind of flattened everything out. And through one of the best curveballs I've ever seen thrown in education, in the history of education, where for the first time in history, every school in the world was stopped from schooling. Every school in the world had to rethink how they're going to re-engage families and children. And every school in the world had to determine, what are we going to keep and what do we learn through this process that we want to hang on to. Like, this wasn't all bad. And so we might want to hang on to this. One of the things that I love to talk about, and if you know me, you know this well, is online, virtual, and hybrid learning, and kind of rethinking what the school day should be. I myself found it very hard as a teacher to engage kids for 7.5 hours a day. Students find it very hard to be engaged for 7.5 hours a day. And I dare say, if we put any two adults in a room and said, now keep each other, engaged and informed for 7.5 hours, we would need padded walls at the end of that time. But yet we expect that of our kids each and every day for 12 full years, 13 if they go to kindergarten. So I believe with my whole heart that rethinking the structure of school could provide an opportunity for that emotional support for teachers and students that there's so much in need of, to kind of weave its way into the day, because we don't really need that many hours in a day to teach. Hate to burst that bubble. I'm sure you guys all know that, though. So hybrid learning, online learning, rethinking how many days we need to go. I mean, could we go for 7.5 hours a day for 4 days? Some districts in Kansas are doing that. Some districts in Texas are doing that. So, there's new models that we can explore. And I think now more than ever is the time to have those conversations. But the trick is how do you get that into the norm? I mean, these have been conversations that some of us have been having for decades, but how do you get that into the mainstream of thinking around schooling? And then we've got the microschooling or the homeschooling. Microschooling is like a mashup of traditional and homeschool, and then we've got homeschool. And a lot of parents have chosen that pathway because they learned during this COVID experience that they could. They're like, oh, I can do this. This is not as hard as I thought it might be. And they're finding resources and tools and online programs that are helping support them and in-person programs that are helping support them. So traditional schools are losing families to micro schools and homeschools because parents have figured out, wow, I really would like to spend more time with my kid. I work from home now. So, this is a win-win. We have a better family structure, et cetera, et cetera. So I think all of those unexpected pivot points in education, we're just trying to sift through. And these are things that we can't explore and make a decision on within 2 or 3 days or 2 or 3 years, or, you know what I mean? I mean, even any kind of transformation takes 5 to 10 years. So we're kind of hitting the place coming out of COVID where we're really going to start seeing some of these things manifest into more of a reality state than a reaction state, in my opinion. And then thirdly, and I'm gonna turn it over to the amazing doctor, systems. There's a lot of folks that are really trying to figure out what the system approach to educator wellness is. We know we have to attend to that because we're losing so many teachers in the field and we're losing people coming into the field. So we know we have to think about educator wellness. And there's a lot of great programs that have spun up for that across the country. And we also need to think about student emotional supports. But these two things aren't really covered by fiscal funds. There's no pot of money that can be designated. It's very hard to get that pushed through when you've got, buildings and infrastructure and curriculum and instruction to say, we're going to put off our reading series this year because we really need to invest in some emotional supports for our teachers and students. Said no superintendent ever. They think it, they want to do it, but they know that everybody would look at them like, why you need to do that. And I think as much as we've done to reduce the stigma of mental illness in our country, or we've tried to do, I think it's still very much something that people struggle with, and they don't know if, when, or how to share it. They don't know when to say, I'm experiencing some depression, or I'm going through some things. They just don't know how to do that. And especially a teacher who's responsible for children. I mean, sometimes if you come into work and you're like, man, I'm really having a bad day, and I don't know if I can handle it today, they get told, can you please go to your room and crush it? And that, can you wait until 3 o'clock to fall apart? Because there's nobody else that we've got to send to your room. So that's a lot to juggle from a principal's perspective, from a superintendent's perspective, to just think about all the challenges that the people who show up in our building, not just teachers, staff, leaders, everybody shows up with their own stories that impact how they move through their day. And I feel like we as teachers and educators are set at a higher bar. We're like preachers and doctors. We're at a higher bar. We're not supposed to break down. We're not supposed to be sad. We're supposed to be joyful all the time. But yet life happens to us too. And we have to show up and be on point. And I think superintendents and principals are figuring out, well, that's not really reality. We've got to do something, but figuring out what to do and how to do it is the trick. And so all of these are incredible challenges that leaders across the country are talking about when we come together at conferences, etc. But we have a leader here that has found some ways of kind of turning these tricks into treats. And I think maybe even if you haven't, we can talk about some ideas that, we could at least share with our audience, and our audience can chime in too on some ways that we could kind of undo some of these tricks.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that introduction, and thank you for that I am actually, we're going to go off script a little bit because now I have a couple of questions for you. I learned something every time we chat. I learned something and I have more questions. I'm going to ask a follow-up question with just a little bit of preamble before we talk systems. Actually, this is systems. This is like meta systems. This is systems on top of systems. So I had the opportunity post-COVID to travel internationally and see some schools in Canada and what they were doing with students and teachers and kids and so on and so forth. And it hadn't occurred to me what we were doing in the United States until I visited Canada and saw what they were doing there. And so let me explain. I actually wrote about this in an article shortly after the international experience. And what it occurred to me is, we all kind of worked our ever-loving tails off through COVID. We were just like gangbusters learning new stuff and learning new things and how we're going to teach differently and kids and kind of working through all this stuff to make education work. And then we got to the end of COVID and we just kind of smashed right through the wall. We just went right after it. We said, all right, we're not going to stop. And here's the image that came into my head. It's like a cell phone. I don't know if you've ever had your cell phone when the battery gets down to like 7% or 6% or 5%. If you're like me, you work even harder, right? Like you're like, just go for it, go for it. And it's never do I do anything of any quality at 5% on my battery, but I'm just working like a madman to try to get whatever juice I can out of my battery. And I feel like that's what almost all of us did in the United States post-COVID. It was 5% battery level, but our kids are way behind. There's so much unfinished learning and all these social things that need to happen. And so we just doubled down and we just went to work. And what I saw in Canada was different. What I saw in Canada was not a supreme focus on academics, not a supreme focus on outcomes and achievement. What I saw was wellness. That was it. And the mental image that came into my mind was just plug in the dang phone. Just plug in the phone, let it charge back up. And so I'm curious from your perspective. This is a question I wanted to ask. I'm curious from your perspective, if we could go back to right at the end of COVID, I'm curious, like what could we have done or what should we have done that would have given folks a chance to reset? Was there anything that could have been done? Or is it just the way our systems are organized?
I think that even when it was happening, one of the things that I kept saying and writing about was take a pause, take a breath. Like we were so eager to get back to normal without recognizing it's never going to be normal again. It's literally never going to be like it was before. So put that out of your mind. And now let's think about what we've learned, where we are, how we've grown, how we've changed, and what things need to look like everywhere, not just schools. But I just wrote an article about kind of the impact of COVID. And if you look at other industries, healthcare has changed, restaurants have changed. There's touchless everything. You go to a kiosk. I
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah.
everything has changed. But we as educators and systems are just dying to get back to what we had, which was chronically broken.
Yeah.
So to me, the great thing we could have done and didn't, because we were getting pressure, if you remember, as
Yeah.
sort of came back to get us back. We got to get back. We got to get back.
Right.
Like, and nobody pushed and said, why?
Right.
Why do we get back?
Right. Absolutely. And that's to the second thing that you said. You talked about transformational moments in time and periods of transformation that could happen and missed opportunities for transformation. And I'm going to share this for, everybody who's listening. There's these moments of transformation, but they happen at the lowest points in our lives typically. Like they're the most you don't do transformation when you're on cloud nine. You typically do transformation like when things kind of suck for lack of a better way to put it. And so one of the things that I like to talk about whenever I talk about transformation is the way that you do it is through compassion. And I use that word very specifically. You break down passion, and that means to suffer. And compassion means to suffer with. And so I think the missed opportunity from my perspective coming out of COVID would have been to approach the situation, that moment in time, that very moment in time with compassion and start by sharing our suffering collectively. As a superintendent, I suffer with a system that appears at times to be broken. Teachers, I want to hear your suffering. And I know I would have heard things like, we're going too fast, we're going in too many different directions, lack of focus, lack of, all those things that we should have said. And then ask students, where are you suffering? And then ask parents, where are you suffering? Then bring all this suffering together, because typically that's how human beings bond and connect. And when we've all had a chance to share our suffering, that's how we create real ownership around a problem. But we didn't do that. We didn't share our suffering. We didn't all come around a table and talk about, what are we going to do and how am I feeling in this moment in time? And we did exactly like you said, Kecia. We just kind of charged forward. We kept working on that cell phone, even though the battery was practically dead. And that loss of opportunity is to me one of the most difficult parts. So let's talk about systems and let's talk about, well, what can we do about it? And that's kind of the whole purpose here. So let's pivot to some positive tools that folks can use, or maybe positive stories. I'd like to tell just one really quick system story that happened to us right as COVID was coming to a close. One of our middle schools was mold infested, and we learned about this before school started. And so what that meant was an entire middle school was going to be displaced. And I'm not aware of any school district in the country, mine included, that has just an extra building sitting around for kids should we need it. And so we had to find a space for them. Well, the place where we looked was what we called our Success Academy, which is our dual credit campus, where kids who are not on track to graduate high school, some with very low credits, some students don't have any credits at all. And these are kids who we typically think of as in a dropout path. We're trying to get them caught up or plugged back into the system. We displaced every one of those kids because we needed the building for our middle school. Now, this created a huge problem because now we have hundreds of kids who would typically be in the dual credit building, and they're no longer there. And so we looked at this the way we try to look at so many problems, and this is the tip. This is the treat. I think that helps people is to recognize that in life sometimes we're faced with these insurmountable problems, and we tend to see constraining variables everywhere we look. So if you're a teacher listening to this right now, or if you're a principal listening to this right now, and you're thinking about the student behaviors that are happening in your classroom and how difficult it is, think about all the tools that you have at your disposal. And those can be thought of as constraining variables. Like, I can only do this, I can only do that, I can only do this, and I'm very limited in my resources. The secret is, can you take your mind into a place where you see constraining variables as enabling variables? So what that meant for us was, these students are displaced. This is an enabling variable for us to think differently about how we educate kids. We went to the local community college and asked if we could rent space, rented 6 classrooms from them, and told them we're going to put 150 kids who were on a dropout path in high school on a community college setting. We would bring food over for them, and we wanted to surround them with more supports than they've ever had historically in their lives, success coaches and what have you. And our goal was for as many as possible to be enrolled in college at the conclusion of the time that they were going to be there. And I'm proud to say, and there was a million things that happened to make this work, but I am so proud to say that of 150 students that were on that campus, all 150 of them completed a college course by the time that we were finished. That's remarkable success. And the way that I think about this is, it's like music. I'm a former music teacher, so I tend to think about music a lot, and it's a lot like music. I want you to think for just a minute about your favorite type of music. Maybe it's jazz, maybe it's reggae, maybe it's art music, maybe it's classical, baroque, maybe you like rap, country. I'll list country for those of you that like country. But if a fun fact about music is, there are only 12 notes. There are only 12 notes on a keyboard, only 12 notes on a guitar, only 12 notes on a trumpet. And you can think of these 12 notes as constraining variables. After all, there's only 12 of them. But every piece of music that's ever been written in the history of mankind has been written with those same 12 notes. And so music is a perfect example of talking about something that can be really a constraining variable and how to turn that into an enabling variable. And oftentimes it's just that mental pivot that means so much for us. And so the mental pivot comes from inside ourselves. And that's a choice that we all have to make. And that then takes me to this notion of happiness. Like, how do you find happiness, or where do you find happiness in your work? So this is where the audience, all the 22 attendees that are with us today, get ready to drop into the chat box, because I'm going to ask you for your definition of happiness. How do you define happiness? What is it? Giving folks some moment to chat. Overall well-being. Nice. How else do we define happiness? Joy, contentment. What else have we got? Peace. Conditional presence and joyful moments. Oh, I like that, Lindsay. Support and making a difference. This is fascinating. Satisfaction. Finding a surprise $5 and you get finding a surprise $5. Definitely, that's happiness. So now I'm going to throw you all a curveball. Some of you that have written here, these are great responses. Now I'm going to throw you a curveball. If that's your definition of happiness, what is your definition of joy? How is that the same or different? Go ahead and drop that into the chat box. What is your definition of joy? Peace. Oh, here we go. Happiness is fleeting, but joy is a mindset. Could be. Unless I think maybe we're onto something. Deep connection, purest form of happiness. Oh, I like that. Purest form of happiness. Joy is a mindset and lasting, right? Sustained energy. Love that, Vicky. So it's interesting, right? This I can't read and talk at the same time. Joy is practice. Amen to that. I do love that. So it bears a little bit of discussion about the difference between happiness and joy. And when I first asked about happiness, a lot of the things that I think were shared were more akin to joy than happiness. I'll take the $5 in a pocket as an example of happiness. Happiness, if you actually look at the etymological derivation of the word and what it comes from and what it means, happiness is something that's outside of ourselves. So it's actually what it actually means is good fortune. So happiness is something that happens to you and it's external. Finding the $5 in your pocket, that's happiness. That just happened to me. And there are things that happen to us in our day that make us really happy. And there are things that happen in our day that make us really sad, right? But these are things that happen outside of us. But what you all keyed in on immediately when we talk about joy is that that's different. Joy is something that is internal. It's an internal state. And joy is a verb state. Joy is practice, to what Lonnie said. Joy is practice. Joy is a verb state. So happiness being external, joy being internal. The way that I try to explain it to folks when I talk about it is every day when I show up to work, I show up with happiness because I consider myself very fortunate to do what I do and to be where I'm at. But I typically leave with joy. I leave with happiness and joy in my heart. And that's something that I take with me. So this whole notion of happiness and joy is like, how do we create environments that are then conducive to joy? How do we create those environments in our classrooms or in our school where we're not looking for the external, we're not looking for the happiness, but we're focused on joy for ourselves and for our students. And I think one of the ways that we not that we avoid happiness, but that we put happiness in its place and we keep joy in our heart is, again, coming back to how we face these obstacles that are going to be thrown in front of us every single day. And that is to say, gosh, I can't control the fact that there's mold in this building. I can't control that a student had an outburst this morning and completely disrupted my class. I can't control those things. And I have these constraining variables that are limiting my ability to respond and react. Or those constraining variables become enabling variables for me to keep an open heart and an open mind and change what's happening in this space right now. And so what I wanted to do was I wanted to take just a quick moment and have you all share some stories, because story sharing is this notion of connecting around suffering. And so let's connect around suffering real quick. I'm going to share my screen, and I'd love for you all to take out your cell phones right now and join me for a couple of minutes. And Kecia and I are going to have some banter back and forth for a few minutes while we're while we're doing that. Kecia, can I get a thumbs up from you? Are you seeing the exchange link up? Great. So everybody jump into the exchange. Take out your cell phones right now. We might drop that in the chat as well if we could, so that everybody has a chance to join. And it's asking you this question: share a story about a student who overcame the odds, a teacher who went well above and beyond, or an administrator who led with deep compassion and empathy. And let's just tell some stories of joy. Give you a minute to think about that. I'm curious, Dr. Ray, do any stories of joy come immediately to your mind?
Oh my goodness. I can think of so many. Um, I, I one story that I can think of immediately is during the course of COVID. It's going to sound very terrible initially. During the course of COVID, this young boy that I work with now, he his dad passed away, and he was also taken out of the school that he had been in up until 5th grade and moved to what ended up being 3 different schools over the years of COVID. And he came to my school. I opened a micro school, and he came to our school, and the the sense of ownership that he has over his own learning now, and the kind of the happiness that I see coming up on his face when he comes in to the building. He only has to come 3 days a week, which is he thinks is amazing. But when he comes into the building, is just a testimony to how environment and having kind of the opportunity to choose a path that works the best for you, and recognizing that everybody isn't going to have the same path. For him to be matched up with a program that meets his needs, he is just a completely different kid. His mom has even said he had to be hospitalized last year for depression, and this year he gets up, he goes to school on his own. He is taking his classes online. He's involved in his youth group at church. I mean, he's just like come out of a shell, and his mom can't believe it. But it's because he's found something that supports him the way he needs to be supported, rather than being told, you've got to go back into this square box. We're sorry, we know you're a triangle, but we got to put you back in this box, in spite of everything you've been through. That didn't happen. Thank goodness his mom kind of saw that and realized that. And he has overcome 3 horrific years. Now, granted, he's way behind on grade level, but
Sure,
he's like, I can do this. I can do this. I got this.
that's
So it's so empowering to see him light up like that.
That's amazing. Yeah, that's it, we all have those stories. I think the story from the VSA experience, I don't think I shared this with you, from the Victoria Success Academy experience that we had with those kids. We got so much notoriety for that program that we were asked by the Texas Association of School Boards to present at governance camp for trustees from all around the state. And our kids from VSA were invited to present. And so we had this girl who stood up in front of an audience of several hundred trustees from around the state of Texas. And she told them a story how at 14 years old, she was a single parent with 0 credits and absolutely no hope of graduating high school. And this girl stood, tears in her eyes and with trustees sobbing in the room. And by the end of her story, she talks about how she's enrolled in college because of this program. And I was just so moved, so moved by that experience.
Yeah.
We've elapsed on the time, and it looks like we just have a few people that wanted to share stories today, which I understand. We're asking something quite bold. I had a student outburst in my office and then wrote an apology letter for the way that they reacted. Growth and maturity. And then we have this thought, or this story: FCS teacher who goes above and beyond for her students. I lost it. There it is. Students want to take your class and learning skills they will use in the real world. And then myself, looking at my own life, learned that I had so many traumatic experiences in my life, in high school, poverty, death of a sister. Now a principal, because I can relate to all students and focus on this big goal and make the necessary sacrifices to reach that goal. Learn about mindset. I love that. Healing through hardship. These stories are beautiful.
Beautiful. Yeah.
And I think there was one at the top that I may have missed. Admin always made me feel heard and valued. Always used empathy when speaking with students and staff. That is wonderful. So I will put some of this together. So I think it would make for a nice word cloud. I will put together a word cloud of some of this, and maybe we can share it with the post recording.
You know, it's so important to remember that everybody has a story.
Yeah.
And their story didn't start the moment they met you.
Right.
You know, and
Right.
I think especially as a principal and a leader, definitely as a teacher for your students to recognize that. And sometimes we do a good job at that and sometimes we don't. But as a principal and a teacher, you have a culture that you try to establish in your school building, and you just want everybody to plug into that. And they've all got different backgrounds and different histories, and they've been at different buildings. And so to just kind of just be accepting a little bit of the differences and try to honor everyone's story
Yeah.
until it becomes, part of your story map, I think is a gift, but also a challenge as a
It
leader.
is. It is absolutely, and it's a big part of our culture here in BISD. And one of the things that I always remind myself, as a matter of fact, you saw me drinking from a coffee cup earlier. My staff got this for me. It says chief storyteller. That's what it says on the coffee cup, because that's often how I describe myself. But I always try to remind myself that everybody you meet has a story that's more sad than yours and probably more happy than yours. Like
Yeah.
everybody you meet has something that is deeply personal to them. So certainly, I know we wanted to leave some time for folks to ask some questions.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you both so much for sharing. We have some audience questions that came in before the webinar, and then I welcome everyone to type additional questions into the chat. I think this is a golden opportunity to connect with two veteran educators who have a really great perspective on how things are going, how they've been, and the hope for the future. With that in mind, I was hoping one or both of you could weigh in on some tips or tricks for educators, how to keep it fresh, how to avoid burnout and bring the joy. What are some of your thoughts around that?
I can go first. And it goes back to my very first year of teaching, 1983, when I was carrying, these things probably don't exist anymore. I'm just putting that out there. But the milk crate that came to your building, and teachers would always nab those to put their papers in to take home and grade. See, everything's digital now, so you don't have to worry about that. But back in the day, we had to lug paper back and forth to grade. And my principal met me at my car. And I was like, I shouldn't have taken this milk cart, like this milk crate. That I was 100% sure she was going to tell me that I stole the milk crate. But instead, she told me that I didn't need to take that kind of work home. And that instead, I needed to work on my lesson plans and assigning work that could be graded during the day, during my planning time, so that I wasn't taking work home. And she said, if you do not do this, you will not last in this field. You will burn out. And she put me with an amazing coach. At that time, we had academic principals, and like I said, it's a completely different way of setting schools up. But my academic principal worked with me on how to design plans and how to give lessons that were abbreviated, if you will, that I could just have 5 or 10 quick things that I could understand whether the kids got it or not. And it freed me up immensely and allowed me to have balance. I could take jazzercise, something else nobody knows about anymore. But I could take class, I could get involved in health classes and do, reading clubs and things that were going to provide some balance to my life and help me not be, I was all in as an educator, but having that balance between things you do for you and things you do for others is always a challenge for those of us who are in the field of serving others. And I appreciate her so much. Her name was Sarah West, and I appreciate her so much just setting that expectation my first year teaching. And I've tried to share that with the teachers that I've mentored and principals that I've mentored along the way. You have to have balance, and it's hard to get because you're tugged back into the system constantly.
I love that. I love the things we do for others and things we do for ourselves. I'm going to key in on that and share something that my coach taught me a couple of years ago, actually. And this is when you take care of yourself, here's what she taught me, and it was really helpful. It can further divide into 2 categories. So everybody listening right now, if this is something that you're struggling with, burnout or frustration or what have you, just take a piece of paper, a blank piece of paper, and draw a vertical line right down the center of that piece of paper. And then on the left side, write self-management. And on the right side, write self-care. And what she had me do, and we did this over the course of a couple of weeks, is she said, let's just focus on self-management right now. This is the stuff that you do where you're kind of taking time for yourself, but you're actually working on work. So if you're a teacher, you're thinking about lesson plans, or you're thinking about your students, or you're thinking about the parents, or you're thinking about the work itself. It's how you're resolving stress in your mind. So I'll use myself as an example. When I'm out running or biking or lifting weights or some of the stuff that I do, that for me is self-management. I'm actually working on work, even though I'm not at work. And this is a healthy thing. This is something that we have to do as human beings because it keeps us mentally engaged in what we're doing. But that's self-management. This is different than self-care. Self-care is the things that we do that we're genuinely filling our cup, right? These are the things you're not thinking about work. And here's the rub. You could take something like a massage. And for some people, a massage is self-management. Like they're actually thinking about work when they're getting a massage, or maybe a pedicure, or maybe you're getting your hair done or whatever. But like you're thinking about work when you're doing it, and that's cool. But then what are you doing for self-care? What are you actually doing where your brain is not thinking about work and it's just, Q is a better person because he does this. And what I found was happening for me, and I've shared this with thousands of people in the last couple of years, and it's true for everyone. We're all pretty quick to put down the things that are in self-management, and we've got stuff, and we try to build in time to our day to do that. But we're all pretty pathetic at coming up with self-care. Frankly, it took me at least a week to try to remember what those things even were for me. It had been so long since I had done it. And so I'm really thoughtful, and I think the subtext behind that is sometimes the stuff that we do for self-management, how we manage stress, it's not always healthy. I described some healthy activities. There's some unhealthy things that people could be doing as well, or taken to the extreme. And so if that's happening, then it's a different conversation. But just going through the exercise of self-management and self-care, so helpful for resolving burnout because it's the self-care that keeps you lit.
Mhm. I think that, along with what Dr. Ray was saying, kind of answers some of the next question, which is, how do we come to school happy and be ourselves every day when we're pulled in so many different directions?
I'm going to start this one. I'm going to share a really dead simple trick on this one. I picked this up in a book somewhere. It was great. Again, about 3 years ago, I picked this up. So how do you show up in this space, right? That's the question. What I did, it was the book was all about like leaving spaces and showing up in spaces. And so it gets you thinking like, how do you show up at work? How do you show up at home? How do you show up with your family? How do you show up in a meeting? What have you? And one of the ideas that I took from the book was to simply take a 2x2, sticky note, and I put it on the dashboard of my car. And for like 2 months, probably, it just said, how do I leave and how do I show up? And so when I would leave the house in the morning, my drive is such that it's mostly straight halfway to work. And then I take one left turn. And then the rest of my drive is to work. And so then going home, it's the exact opposite. It's mostly straight and then a right turn. And that's about half and half. And so what I would do is when I left the house in the morning, I would spend the first half of my drive thinking, how did I leave that space? How did I leave that space with those people that I love so much? What were the great parts? What were the things that I wish I would have done differently? And then when I made that turn, how am I going to show up for the people who are counting on me, for the people who love me, for the people who care about me? I'm talking about work, right? How do I show up for them? And so I would focus in on that. And then leaving the office, how did I leave? And then I make that right turn. And how am I going to show up? And within a week, my wife said to me, "You are a different human being. You are showing up at home as a different human being. Like, this is a person that I married 25 years ago who has happiness and joy as a part of your life." And I'm like, small things, but if it works, steal it, use it.
Yeah, that's a really simple exercise. Talk a little bit, if you would, about younger teachers. So what can we do to support younger teachers and staff, those millennials or Gen Zs who might have different priorities than baby boomers or Gen Xers? What are some thoughts and tricks on supporting those younger individuals?
Well, I can start on this. One thing when I was a principal, I used to tell my new teachers was, um, don't get assimilated. So you remember the Borg, and beings would just be assimilated and turn into this one non-emotional, non-thinking really being. And new teachers come with such energy and such enthusiasm. And I mean, some skills probably need a little honing in on, but that would be the case if they showed up to any job because they've never had a professional job before, most likely. And I don't want anyone to crush their spirit because they're, a little green. Everybody was green once. And so have forgiveness, have a little grace, and welcome that enthusiasm in, and then just encourage them to push back on assimilation. When teachers want you to do what they do, ask why. Tell me how this is different than what I'm thinking of doing, and turn it into try to turn it into a teaching, learning experience rather than just accepting, oh, they're a veteran teacher. Not all veteran teachers are A-game teachers, let me tell you. And not all new teachers are, at the bottom of the rung either. That some come in very well, very capable of enticing kids into learning. I walked to school a couple of weeks ago, and I'm gonna say the average teacher had less than 3 in this particular school, had less than 3 years experience. It's a school that's undergoing a transformation. And so, uh, all the teachers that have options are going to other schools. And this principal was like, walk to school with me. And those kids were fired up. Now, could the teacher have done a few things differently with their instruction? Could they have done their set better? Could they have done some assessment opportunities? Yes. But were the kids sitting, this is a middle school, and they were sitting, either on the floor in their desk, just looking up with amazement and awe. Even I, with one teacher, was like drawn into his lesson. So don't kill that. Don't squash that when they're just getting started. It would be the same as a toddler who's learning to walk. If they're not walking perfectly, just sit down. Just don't get up and walk until you can walk perfect. Said no mother ever to their toddler. Right. So let them toddle in to their veteran years of teaching. But if we start squashing them early, we're going to lose them.
I love that image of a toddler learning to walk. That's so appropriate. I was gonna give two comments that fit neatly within what you're just talking about, because if we treated each other the way we would treat our own children, I mean, if learning to walk is a struggle or learning to ride a bike is a struggle, here's the first thing that I was gonna say. Our teams oftentimes struggle most when we have task conflict devolve into relationship conflict. Right? So if the task conflict is, child's not learning to ride the bike. This is a task conflict. But when that devolves into a relationship conflict, you're a bad mom, you're a bad dad, this is a real problem. And I'm like, that's such a great image. The second thing I was going to say, also applicable, is that sometimes in education or in any work environment, not just education, in any work environment, we forget that the people beside us are more important than the task in front of us. Just to put it as simply as you possibly can, the people beside us are more important than the task in front of us. And we forget that sometimes. I think as it relates to generations, and I'll tie all that back to this question of generations. I think, we've all read this as much as you can imagine on generations and differences in generations and what have you. If there's one truism that appears to be mostly correct, and I know you can't put people into categories, and everybody fits neatly and nicely in each of those categories, but in an older generation, there was a group of folks who were truly committed to the organization. So at Victoria ISD, they signed up to work at Victoria ISD, and they worked for Victoria ISD for decades at a time. And most of us think of that as a previous generation. Some of those folks are still in the system, but baby boomers typically, as they're matriculating out, this is sort of a profile that fits. And then when you get to sort of that Gen X group, they're not committed to the organization as much as they're committed to the team. I mean, these are people who kind of go to work together, and they form these real tight teams of any kind of size. And interestingly enough, if the team members leave, folks will go with them, and they're not going to go join some other organization. They're going because they want to stay with the team. They'll just roll with the team wherever the team goes. And I think folks do that to some degree in that particular generation. And then in this generation that follows, there's more of a focus on self. And so it's not focused on the organization. It's not focused on the team. And those of us who historically focused on the team or focused on the organization look at the next generation and say, well, there's something wrong with them. They're wired weird because they're not, all their friends aren't at work, and they're not connected in the way that we want them to be connected. No, they're connected, but they're connected uniquely. They're connected differently. And again, this is where it comes back to, don't let task conflicts devolve into relationship conflicts. Because too many times somebody sits around a table and says, well, those, millennials, if they just knew what it meant to X, Y, or Z. And it's a fraudulent claim. It's just it's a narrative. It's a story we're telling ourselves in our head that's just patently untrue.
Yeah, it's funny how our perspective changes as we grow older. It's one of the fun things of growing older, I've observed. Final question for you. What do administrators need right now? If you could wave a magic wand, what would be the thing for administrators?
Gosh, that's a wonderful question. First, if you've got an answer off the top of your head.
I would say the freedom to do what they know is right, provided it's research, but not crazy land. Some of us can go off into crazy land, but I think a lot of administrators, superintendents, principals, but especially superintendents, have their hands chronically tied, and they are governed. I mean, if you think about it, we're the only profession that has people govern us and manage us who have no expertise in what we do. Now think about that for a minute. So our school boards, many of them, they haven't been superintendents. They haven't been school leaders, right? Some may have, most are, a lot are former teachers, but not that many have been able to get on the school board against other people in the community that might have a little bit more cash for that election campaign. And the politicians that write our legislation aren't professional educators. So we're governed by people who have no experience in what we do. If that could be changed,
Right.
Or if at least there could be an understanding that, oh, hey, they're the professional educator, They've gone to school for 1,000,000 years to know how to do this. They've got 30 years experience. Maybe we should let them do what they know is right. If just that little mentality would shift, I think we would see exponential improvements in education today.
Yeah, that's so well stated. I can't say it any better than that. I agree with you 100%. It's a combination of the autonomy to do what they know is right and the tools and resources they know they need to get it done. Yeah, that is well stated.
Well, I want to wrap things up before we hit the top of the hour with a great big thank you to both of you for joining us. It's brought happiness and joy to my day for sure. And I think that those who were fortunate enough to participate with us today feel the same. We really appreciate you joining us today. We hope that this was a pleasure for you as it was for me. Um, I am excited to have both of you back again and again and again. So thank you so much for joining us. And thank you everyone for participating. Have a wonderful Halloween. I hope you have many, many more treats and tricks today and the rest of the school year. Thank you very much. Have a great day, everyone.